After one of the worst crimes in the history of South Korea, the police turned on the victims and began to harass them as well. When very little was done in the way of justice, the public took things into their own hands in order to get some retribution. This is a case that was requested to me many times, but honestly I always put it off just because it was so extremely uncomfortable to talk about, but maybe that's a sign that it needs to be discussed. Especially now that there have been some very recent developments, I think it's finally time to talk about the Miryang gang rape incident. This story starts with a 14-year-old girl who has been called Choi in the media. One day in June of 2003, Choi was trying to call her friend on the phone when she made a mistake and dialed the wrong number. The person on the other end of the line was a boy around her age, and after apologizing for dialing the wrong number, the two actually got to talking. This boy has been called Kim, and the two actually decided to exchange contact info and keep in touch. Choi and Kim became more acquainted over about 6 months, talking fairly regularly online. While Choi felt like the two had become pretty good friends, she didn't really know who Kim was behind the scenes. Kim was a member of a huge unofficial gang of middle and high school age boys that people have come to call the Miryang Alliance, or by similar names such as the Miryang Union. This was a very large group of boys consisting of anywhere from 50 to 100 members. Most of the boys had given up on college, instead meeting at a factory where they were all receiving some job training in order to hopefully find some employment after high school. Many of them were living at a dormitory near a vocational school, hoping to get a job in Busan sometime after graduation. The bulk of them were described as juvenile delinquents, and it's safe to say that none of them really had the best of intentions in mind. An official from the Gyeongnam Provincial Office of Education has said about kids like this, "For high school seniors in the humanities who have difficulty entering college, the schools entrust education to vocational schools, and the vocational schools control them, but it is practically difficult to control them after school." While talking to Choi online, Kim introduced her and her sister to a boy named Park, the informal ringleader of the group of boys. They played nice with her over the months, gradually getting her to lower her guard over time. When they felt that she would be a little more susceptible to coming to meet them in person, they invited her out to where they lived in Miryang, saying, "Come visit Miryang sometime." Unfortunately, in January of 2004, Choi decided to do just that. When Choi got to Miryang, Kim and a few other boys invited her over to a guest house they were using. This is where all of the horror truly began. Park and a large group of other boys began to beat Choi with a blunt object before using that same object to sexually assault her, and eventually all gang raped her in a massive group. To add insult to injury, the boys recorded the whole assault on video with a handheld camcorder. They told Choi that if she ever told anyone about this, they would release the video on the internet for all to see. They wouldn't let it end here either. Now that they had Choi under their thumbs with the blackmail, they decided to hold it over her head to get whatever they wanted out of her. They called her back out to Miryang about 10 times over the next 11 months. Each time, she would be gang raped by a group of anywhere from 3 to 24 boys at once. Over time, at least 44 different boys had violated her in total, with many of them coming back more than once to get what they wanted. The gang got more bold with what they asked of Choi. They began to extort money from her as well, bleeding her dry with all their demands for cash. It didn't end with money though. Now they wanted her to bring more girls. Knowing that Choi had a 16-year-old cousin from their previous online chats, they ordered her to bring this cousin out under the threat of releasing the blackmail footage. She did so, and this cousin was assaulted in the same manner that Choi had been. With 2 girls not being enough, they ordered Choi to bring her 13-year-old sister along the next time. At least this time, it seems that the younger sister wasn't sexually assaulted, but she was taunted and beaten with some sort of sex toy by the end of the ordeal. The boys continued to videotape many of these assaults to add to their backlog of blackmail material, feeling that they would be safe as long as they had these videos to hold over the girls' heads. After a while though, Choi began to refuse to come to see them. So the boys threatened to call her school and tell them what had been going on, feeling that her reputation would be ruined and she might even get kicked out. Eventually, Choi's cousin told her mother what had been happening. This woman, Choi's aunt, was rightfully appalled and quickly went to report the entire ordeal to the police. Choi and another girl were brought in to be interviewed by the cops. Right away, they requested to talk with a female police officer, but this request was denied. Instead, a male officer came in to speak with them and immediately began to question as to whether or not their claims were genuine. Above all, the police were very angry that a scandal like this would ruin the reputation of their town. This officer said to them, "Did you try to entice the guys? You ruined the reputation of Miryang. Those boys who would be leading the city in the future are all now arrested thanks to you. What are you going to do? I'm afraid that my daughter will turn out like you." The officer even asked them outright, did they stick it in or not? Shortly after, they had a few of the boys brought in to be identified. Rather than have Choi identify them through a two-way mirror like normal, where she could see the suspects but they couldn't see her, instead the officers had her identify the criminals face to face. She did so through tears in her eyes, barely able to look up to point out the boys as they stared back at her. The officer ended by telling her, "My hometown is Miryang, and you girls have brought disgrace on this city." During the investigation, the police did very little to hide Choi's identity. They quickly leaked enough of her information for journalists and the internet to find out who she was, putting the spotlight on her in what was becoming a national incident. Some of the officers had even gone out, got drunk, and flat out told karaoke patrons and waitresses the names of the victims involved. Pretty shortly after, 3 of the boys were arrested, and the police were actually content to stop there. When information on the case first appeared in December of 2004, users on the internet were outraged. They demanded that the police do more to punish the gang of boys. Letting loose on the police in public as well, they began to chant "arrest all perpetrators" whenever they would come across them. Following protests from the victims, their families, and the public at large, the police went on to arrest 9 more of the boys. The police continued their investigation, and when realizing that many of the boys were all in one place, decided to make their move. They stormed an internet cafe where a large group of the boys were congregated and arrested them all en masse. The police, while investigating the case and interviewing the boys, came to find that there were 2 more female victims that Choi didn't even know about, bringing the total number of victims up to 5. Upon making this discovery, the police came to feel that there could very well be even more victims that they hadn't heard of. It wasn't too long before the families of the boys started to threaten Choi and the other victims, telling them, "Now that you've reported our sons, you better watch your back." During an interview with one of the boys' parents on TV, this parent said, "Why should we feel sorry for the victim's family? Why don't you consider our suffering? Who can resist temptation when girls are trying to seduce boys? They should have taught their daughters how to behave in order to avoid this kind of accident." It wasn't only the families of the boys, but their friends as well who gave the victims this sort of treatment. Even more surprisingly, some of the boys had girlfriends who fully supported them as well. Hwang Seong-mi, the girlfriend of one of the gang members, posted on her social media about the incident. She posted with a sort of sarcastic support for the victims and the police, implying that the whole thing was overblown. She wrote, "Did it all get sorted out okay? I've heard that apart from 3 people, everyone came out fine. Those girls were so ugly anyway. Anyway, good work." The scandal spread all throughout the news media as more grisly details of the crime gradually came to surface. As it turns out, there were much more boys involved than the original assumed 40-something. The police came to know of up to 70 more perpetrators, people who either watched the sexual assaults, participated in the extortion, or acted as lookouts while the other boys committed the crimes. This brought the total amount of criminals to well over 100. The police came to announce that in addition to the people who had already been arrested, they planned to request arrest warrants for 10 more students fairly soon. As information spread of the attacks, so did misinformation. The public, in disbelief that a group of seemingly normal middle and high school age boys could do this, and in such numbers, began to say that it was actually all the doing of a gang of large, older high school students who were covered in gang-related tattoos. However, the police, even members of the gang themselves, would come out to say that none of the students really met this description, and before the case came about, they hadn't even really considered themselves to be any sort of formally organized gang or group. They were just a large, loosely organized collection of miscreants. As Choi, her cousin, and her sister went back and forth to the police office for questioning, paperwork, and updates on the case, they would routinely be harassed by the boys' family members right outside of the police station. They said, The perpetrators' families did not apologize, but instead shouted at us, which made us angry and scared. We are especially afraid that most of the male students will be released and face retaliation. Some of the parents told the girls, "Let's see if you do well after reporting this. Be careful," while making threatening looks and gestures towards them. The girls were blamed for all of the attacks, being told that they had seduced the boys and that they weren't behaving properly as young ladies. Above all, Choi and the others feared that they would face retaliation as soon as many of the male students were released from police custody. Eventually, one of the boys' parents even came to meet Choi at school. While she was in class, this mother approached her, demanding that she sign a petition for her son to get less severe charges. Hopefully only probation. Scared, Choi ran and locked herself in the bathroom until that parent left. It wasn't long after that she dropped out of school entirely due to the harassment and the depression surrounding the entire incident. The police promised that they would investigate as to whether or not the parents made any threats, but it doesn't seem that they ever went through with it. While the police promised to track down more and more of the boys and arrest them all, they didn't. They arrested 12 of them while merely booking another 29 of them without detention and simply letting the rest of them go. Very shortly after starting the investigation, the police just completely closed the case, saying no further criminal activity has been detected. Eventually, the police's awful mishandling of the case was brought to light. The public was disgusted at how they treated the victims during the questioning phase. When criticized for ignoring the request for a female officer to interview them, the police deflected by saying that there were simply too many suspects and that they didn't have a female investigator on staff who was skilled enough to handle it. For that, they later apologized, posting to their website, ignoring the demand for a female police officer to question the victims and for a police officer to insult the victims was indeed a wrongful act. When it came to the criticism revolving around making the girls identify the criminals face to face, the police defended themselves by saying, "The room to window the assailants is too small for more than one assailant to go in, so we have asked beforehand for the victim to point out the assailants." Protesters were horrified to hear that the police had accused the young girls of embarrassing their hometown, leading them to shout at the police, "Protect the victims, don't harass them." Now that the victims' identities were nearly public knowledge, everyone feared for the safety of the girls from here on out, especially given that they were already being harassed. The Ulsan Women's Hotline put out a statement saying, "There is no social protection or consideration for victims," while demanding harsher punishment for the suspects. A lawyer came out and said that he would offer pro bono legal help to all 3 of the girls in court, bringing a woman on staff with him just to comfort them. The Miryang Police Department went on to replace 9 of their 13 detectives, holding them responsible for the awful handling of the case and the terrible PR nightmare they had caused. The police chief, Jong Soo-il, posted on the police station's website, "I apologize for causing concern to the citizens due to the unfortunate incident involving some students in the Miryang area. We will strengthen our school violence prevention activities in the future and make every effort to prevent such incidents from happening again." The officer that accused the girls of embarrassing the city of Miryang was given what has only been called grave disciplinary punishment by the police station. Over about a year, of the 44 boys that were found to have taken part in these sexual assaults, only about 10 of them were actually recommended by the prosecutors to receive sentencing. A further 20 of them were just sent to juvenile detention centers. However, after some time, it began to become clear that none of them were going to face any sort of punishment. This is because, due to laws at the time, in order for these criminals to receive punishment, the victim would have to press charges themselves, which Choi did not do. This was mainly because of Choi's father, a very problematic alcoholic who had been divorced from her mother for about 3 years after beating her. He retained the parental rights in the family and came to convince Choi to take a deal. They would take a large sum of money, about 45 million won, about $32,000, to reach a settlement with the boys' parents in order not to press charges. Sadly, Choi didn't end up even seeing a fraction of the money. Instead, her father used 15 million won to go towards buying a house in Ulsan, while the rest of the money was fought over by the other adults in the family and taken by other relatives to treat themselves. Choi ran away from home, reuniting with her mom somewhere down the road. Eventually, custody of her and her sister was given back to the mother. They began going to school in a different region, but unfortunately they couldn't escape the boys' parents who continued to harass them even in an entirely different city. Later on, Choi's father died of alcohol poisoning. Choi's mental health quickly deteriorated as her life was in shambles, leading to her having to get psychiatric care and even be hospitalized on multiple occasions. Choi's mother, now taking the reins, decided to sue the Miryang police for 110 million won, about $80,000, citing extreme emotional suffering. The court felt that this was fully justified and ruled in favor of Choi's family. Initially, the courts had only found the police guilty of leaking the victim's information, and they were ordered to pay 50 million won, about $36.5 thousand, to the family. But after appeal, they broadened the scope of the accusations, accusing the police officers of negligence in protecting the victims as well. The court said, their insulting remarks were related to the performance of their duty, and it is apparent that the victims felt ashamed. Protecting victims is more important when the victims are minors. The police also violated the victims' human rights, as they made the girls point out their assailants in front of the boys despite the possibility of revenge attacks. By making the victims identify their attackers in an open area, the police failed to protect the rights of the victims and caused them to suffer humiliation. Such an act can never be justified, even with the stated claim by the police that they did so in order to expedite the probe. The court eventually ordered that the state pay each sister 30 million won, about $22,000, and their mother 10 million won, about $7,000. They said that the deciding factor was the cruel statements made by the police to the girls that had caused them so much mental turmoil. When it came to the actual criminals, the prosecutors either dropped their charges entirely or sent them off to juvenile courts who just did nothing. While originally they wanted some of them to go to prison for about 4 years, this just never happened. Given that a number of them had either gotten into college or found jobs during this time, the prosecutors simply refused to press charges against them. In the end, every single one of them got off completely scot-free. Now in her new city, Choi tried multiple times to end her own life. She never did end up graduating from high school and went on to live the rest of her life in secret. It isn't really known how she lived her life after she decided to go off the grid. She even fell out of touch with her own lawyer himself as she went into hiding and completely shut herself off from the rest of the world. Things went quiet for a few years, that is until 2010. That's when Hwang Seon-mi, the girlfriend of one of the gang members who berated the victims online, came back into the spotlight. This is because she herself passed the police officer exam and got herself a job as a cop working at the Gyeongnam Provincial Police Agency. Once this leaked out, onlookers were not happy at all. The decision to hire Hwang at all was incredibly controversial given her defense of criminals and demeaning of victims online. Online users began to post reviews on the police station, saying, "She is not qualified to be a police officer. It is absurd that she is making fun of the victims of humiliating crimes as a woman, but how can we have such a person as a police officer in our country?" And, "This kind of person is a police officer. Can you believe it?" Hwang ended up posting an apology online, saying that she regrets her past behavior. She said that it was merely a mistake she committed in her youth and asked for their understanding. But nobody really went for it. This is mainly because of a statement she made while applying for her job in the first place, in which she wrote, "I am a very honest and diligent person and I know myself well. I think about crime from the viewpoint of criminals too, and in case of sexual assault I am able to consider both, victims as well as criminals' position and whether the victim did not walk around in a manner encouraging to be assaulted." It goes without saying that people felt that this statement was both problematic and less than genuine. They didn't really appreciate to hear that walking around in a certain manner could qualify as asking to be assaulted. In response, the police station said that they would investigate her, and if it turns out that she did say those things online previously, they would hold her accountable somehow. Years and years came to pass, and it really seemed like the entire case was over. However, there was one person out there who never forgot. In 2004, this person was still strongly in the belief that the Miryang boys deserved to face some sort of justice. If that wasn't going to be done in a court of law, it was going to be done in the public court of opinion. This person decided to anonymously create a YouTube channel, one that they called Abyss Vault. This person, who I'll refer to as Abyss, began by posting a video exposing one of the Miryang boys, one that he called Shin. Shin, since the incident, had changed his name and moved to a new city, where he got a job selling cars. After this video was released, Shin quickly deleted his Instagram page and went off the grid. Afterwards, his company swiftly fired him, posting to their page, "We are taking this situation very seriously, and the person in question has been fired." Shin was only the first of many to go down. The next video would come a few days later. This video was of none other than Park, the ringleader. Ever since the incident happened, Park actually lived a happy, normal life. He had gotten married, had a daughter, and opened up a restaurant with his family. After the video exposing him, his restaurant was quickly bombed with 1-star reviews and his reputation was ruined. Eventually, some specialists were able to point out that his restaurant violated some construction-related laws, getting the whole place shut down entirely. A third man, whose real name is not clear, was exposed soon after. This one was apparently already in legal trouble after having become a loan shark, even having spent some time in prison since the original crimes took place. It came to be clear that a lot of the perpetrators, now in their 30s, had normal jobs, families, and seemed happy. Creepily enough, an odd number of them came to have daughters. The public felt that they had clearly done nothing to repent. They simply had their crimes swept under the rug and never did anything to earn these normal happy lives, especially considering how completely Choi's life had fallen apart during this time. Eventually, other YouTubers aside from Abyss came forward to identify the criminals. Some of them were successful, with another man being found to be an employee of a large company that removed him from his duties after the video in order to perform an internal investigation. However, not all of these emerging channels would be quite as diligent and factual as Abyss had been. One channel started to attack people who knew the criminals instead of the criminals themselves, pointing out a woman that was said to be Shin's girlfriend. The problem is, this woman didn't even know who Shin was. Regardless, business crumbled at her nail salon after the allegations came out, leading her to take legal action against the YouTuber. It wasn't long before the police were hit with over a dozen complaints and petitions by some of the Miryang boys, but also by a good number of people who were accused despite not being involved with them whatsoever. To add insult to injury, various YouTubers were claiming that they were doing this with the permission of Choi and her family. The problem is, Choi still hadn't come out of hiding. It was a complete lie. This was confirmed by the Korea Sexual Violence Relief Center, one of the few outlets that Choi still had contact with in the outside world. Abyss has posted to his channel's community tab that he would continue to upload videos exposing the criminals regardless of what happened with all the copycat channels. Speaking of this, Hyobin Lee, an adjunct professor of politics and ethics at Chungnam National University, said, "The general reaction has been positive. If the judiciary had handled the case properly 20 years ago, these private sanctions might not have occurred." David Tizard, an assistant professor of education at Seoul Women's University, has shared similar sentiment, saying, "Many today believe that justice should be served, that those who have wronged others should themselves face a similar situation." One Abyss copycat came to take down his videos and apologize to the victims once Choi's younger sister reached out and asked him to stop revealing their identities again after all this time. Abyss has also deleted some videos that may have been made on shakier ground. However, they soon re-uploaded the videos upon request from Choi's younger brother. Things got even more unusual when one of the Miryang boys posted an apology video to YouTube himself, completely of his own volition, probably hoping to get out in front of any bad press. In the video, he said, "I want to say I am so sorry to the victim, who would have been living in unimaginable pain since 2004. I know no apology would absolve me, but I sincerely would like to apologize. I will never forget what I did and live the rest of my life in remorse." The man, who has been called Lee, was the first to ever apologize for the incident. While doing so, he expressed an intent to go into hiding himself. Not long after, another man named Yoon made an apology video himself. Neither of them went into much detail about what had happened or mentioned any specifics, only saying that they were remorseful. Afterwards, the Korea Sexual Violence Relief Center released the first statement from Choi in years. Choi wrote, "We did not expect so many people to be interested in the case, thinking that it would fade away like it had before when the incident was mentioned in a movie or TV show. We thank the people who have expressed their anger and concern as if it happened to them, and for not forgetting us." She said she felt encouraged by the public's comments in her defense, feeling that the society that once spurned her might finally be changing for the better. She hoped that interest in the case wouldn't be a flash in the pan and that people would continue to out the criminals for what they had done. But she did have criticism for the people doxing those who weren't actually involved with the crime, saying, "We hope there won't be any more victims suffering from secondary harm due to the actions of the police and prosecution." Then, to everyone's shock and surprise, Choi came out to give an interview to the media herself, speaking for the first time publicly in 20 years. She spoke of the horrors that she went through during that time, her naivete during the police process, and how the whole thing had come to affect her over all these years. She said, "I was too young to know anything about what's going to happen, and I thought our testimonies would be enough to have them punished. It's been the same since 2004. I can't live my daily life without medication." Choi said that both her and her younger sister never did graduate school and that both were still undergoing heavy mental health treatment to this very day. She said that, for a while, she had assumed that the perpetrators in her case were going to be punished. The last she heard, many of them were going to trial, after all. It wasn't until much later that she found out nothing had happened to any of them. She said that she and her sister both still feared retribution from the men, especially now that they were being doxxed online. She said, "We're still living in hell, and it was frightening." Reflecting on her life, she ended by saying, "I can't even remember what my dreams were. I just want my mom, my brother, and my sister, who suffered so much because of me, to be free from this nightmare." Once again, thank you for watching my video. If you found the topic interesting, please give it a like, it really helps me out in the algorithm, and subscribe if you want to hear more stories like this. If you want, I've started up a podcast with 4 of my friends called the NBR Podcast. If you find this channel interesting, you might like that too. I've also opened up a merch store. There you can get yourself some cool Dire Trip t-shirts. If you post a picture of yourself wearing one, I'll put it up on here. If you want, go ahead and follow me on social media. I also really appreciate when people follow me on Patreon. There you can get videos early, ad-free, and uncensored. Channel memberships are back up too, and you get the same benefits there as well. This has been your host, Kyle. Thank you, and good night.